All right, so today we're going to really dive deep into the Joel Rifkin case.
Oh, yeah.
A serial killer who was operating in New York
Right.
back in the late 80s and early 90s. So
Yeah.
this is a case that I think a lot of people are already familiar with, at least
Yeah.
on a surface level.
Uh-huh.
But, I think what we want to try to do today is really unpack some of the
Yeah.
specifics of this case and really try to kind of,
Right.
see what makes it so fascinating and frankly disturbing.
Well, and I think, one of the things that makes it so fascinating is
Yeah.
for years, his first victim was a Jane Doe.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't until 2013 that they were able to identify her through DNA as Heidi Balch.
That's incredible. I mean, does that make you wonder how many other
It does.
cases are out there that are just waiting for that one piece
Absolutely.
of the puzzle to just
Absolutely.
fall into place?
Yeah, and I think, the brutality of this case is amplified by the fact that he removed her teeth and fingertips.
Yeah, that detail always gets to me.
Right.
It's almost like he was trying to just completely erase her from existence. Was that purely practical, or do you think there was something deeper psychologically motivating?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I think, when you look at dismemberment, we see this with a lot of serial killers. And it's rarely a simple act.
Yeah.
Is it a way to exert control even in death, or is it a way to delay identification?
Oh, almost like a game he's playing.
It could be.
Yeah, with the authorities.
Yeah, it could be.
So we know that Rifkin targeted sex workers.
Right.
And we see that in a lot of serial killer cases. So why do you think this particular group is so often victimized?
Yeah, it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
They operate often on the margins of society,
Right.
and that makes them vulnerable, right? They may be less likely to report abuse or disappearance to
Right.
the police out of fear or distrust of law enforcement.
Makes sense.
And unfortunately, their disappearances may not be noticed as quickly
Right.
as someone with a more traditional lifestyle.
So Rifkin himself was adopted into a seemingly stable upper middle class family on Long Island.
Right.
So he wasn't, living on the streets or anything like that.
Right.
What pushed him towards this dark path?
Well, it's easy to assume that serial killers emerge from broken homes
Right.
or abusive environments.
Yeah.
And, Rifkin kind of challenges that simplistic view.
Mm-hmm.
He did struggle in school with learning disabilities. He was reportedly socially isolated.
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine feeling like an outsider, especially during those formative years.
Sure.
That has to have some kind of impact on you.
And I think, it's crucial to remember that we're not trying to excuse his actions here.
Right.
We're trying to understand the factors that might have contributed to his development.
Understand.
And in Rifkin's case, there's another layer.
Yeah.
His father committed suicide in 1987.
Oh, wow.
And experiencing such a profound loss, especially at a young age,
Yeah.
can be incredibly traumatic.
Definitely a turning point.
It is.
And it's interesting that just a few months after his father's death,
Right.
he was arrested for soliciting a prostitute, almost like that event unlocked something dark within him.
Well, and that early arrest is quite telling.
Yeah.
It suggests a pre-existing fascination with sex work, perhaps as an outlet for feelings of inadequacy or a desire for control that he lacked in other areas of his life.
So we're really seeing this complex kind of interplay of nature and nurture, personal demons,
Yes.
and these societal forces that are all colliding to create this perfect storm.
Exactly. And it's this complexity that makes studying serial killers so fascinating, if a bit unsettling.
Yeah, unsettling is a good word for
You
it.
never get a simple answer. It's always a puzzle with multiple interlocking pieces.
And in Rifkin's case, the puzzle pieces are particularly dark and disturbing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like we're trying to look into the abyss
Right.
and really try to, crap our minds around the mindset of someone who could do something like this.
Absolutely.
Did Rifkin ever display any of the, kind of classic warning signs of budding psychopathy, like the McDonald triad and things like that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it,
Yeah.
speaks to the challenges of predicting behavior.
Sure.
There is no single profile
Right.
that fits every serial killer.
Right.
But we do see patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And, the McDonald triad that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
which includes, bedwetting, fire setting, and cruelty to animals in childhood,
Yeah, right.
is often cited
Yeah.
as a potential red flag.
Sure.
But it's important to note that not everyone who displays these behaviors
Right.
will go on to become a violent criminal.
Right. Of course not.
So,
So it's not a guarantee, but just something to maybe keep an eye out for.
yeah, I mean, it's really about,
Yeah.
recognizing a potential for escalating aggression
Mm-hmm.
that, if left unchecked,
Right.
can manifest in some horrific ways.
And in Rifkin's case, I haven't seen any information
Right.
about those specific
Yeah,
behaviors.
and that's not uncommon.
Okay.
The presence or absence
Right.
of
Right.
those behaviors
Right.
doesn't definitively predict future violence.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
So let's talk about Rifkin's crimes. We know that he killed 17 women
right.
over a 4-year period.
Yeah.
He often dismembered his victims, scattered their remains in different locations.
Uh-huh.
Was that purely a strategy to avoid detection, or was there something more sinister at play?
Well, like with many things, it's probably a combination of factors.
Right.
On a practical level,
Yeah.
dismemberment makes it very difficult to identify victims
Right.
and piece together a crime.
Yeah, it makes sense from a purely practical standpoint.
But there's often a psychological component as well.
Yeah.
Some experts believe that dismemberment is a way for the killer to assert dominance
Uh-huh.
and control over the victim, even after death.
Wow.
It can also be a way to dehumanize the victim,
Right.
making it easier for the perpetrator to distance himself from the act.
That's a chilling thought, and it makes me think about the victims, these women who were
Yeah.
living on the fringes of society, often struggling with addiction or poverty.
Right.
Their lives were already so difficult.
Absolutely.
And then they had this encounter with Rifkin.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking to think about the vulnerability of these women and the fact that their disappearances may have gone unnoticed
Right.
for longer
Yeah,
because of their circumstances.
absolutely.
And it really highlights a systemic issue,
Yeah.
the way that society often overlooks or undervalues certain groups,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes them easier targets.
It's like they were invisible even in life.
Right.
And then in death,
Yeah.
they were reduced to
Yeah.
scattered body parts.
Which is why it's so important to remember their names, to remember their stories.
Yeah.
We can't let them just be forgotten.
Yeah,
And one of those women was Tiffany Bresciani.
right.
Her murder ultimately led to Rifkin's downfall.
Yeah, because her boyfriend, Dave Rubenstein, the Kunk musician,
Yes.
actually saw her get into Rifkin's truck.
Did, yeah.
And he was able to give the police a description,
Right.
which was crucial in tracking him down.
Yeah, and tragically, Rubenstein, overwhelmed by guilt and grief, committed suicide shortly after Bresciani's disappearance.
Oh, wow.
So it just shows the ripple effect of these crimes.
Yeah,
The impact is not just on the immediate victims,
right.
but it's on their loved ones, their communities.
The damage extends so much further.
It does. It does.
Now, Rifkin's arrest was pretty dramatic. He was pulled over for a routine traffic violation,
Right. A missing license plate.
missing license plate,
Yeah,
and
right.
then ended up leading police on a high-speed chase that ended with him crashing his truck.
Right.
And when they searched the truck, they found Bresciani's body.
Game over.
Game over. Yeah.
The evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty of 9 murders.
Uh-huh.
Authorities believe he was responsible for at least 17.
At least 17, yeah.
And was sentenced to 203 years to life, essentially sentenced to die in prison.
Right?
Which he did. He spent over 2 decades in solitary confinement.
He did.
What kind of impact does that level of isolation have on a person?
Well, it's hard to overstate the psychological toll
Yeah.
of prolonged solitary confinement.
Right.
I mean, humans are social creatures.
Sure.
We crave connection.
Yeah.
And to be deprived of that year after year
Uh-huh.
can lead to,
Right.
depression, anxiety, hallucinations.
Oh, wow.
Even psychosis.
So even within the prison system,
Right.
Rifkin was an outlier.
He was.
And his case raises all these questions about the nature of punishment
It does.
and rehabilitation.
Yeah.
I mean, can someone like Rifkin ever be rehabilitated?
Great.
Is solitary confinement truly a humane form of punishment?
These are really tough questions.
Yeah.
With no easy answers. For sure.
And it forces us to really confront our own beliefs about justice,
Uh-huh.
about the limits of human capacity for change,
Right.
and about the responsibility
Yeah.
society has to both protect its citizens
Right.
and address the root causes of violence.
And there's another layer to this case that I find interesting.
Okay.
The fact that Rifkin was initially considered a
Right.
potential suspect
Yeah.
in the Gilgo Beach killings.
Right.
No, those murders, which involved the bodies of several sex workers being found on Long Island's South Shore,
Uh-huh.
occurred during the same period
Yeah.
that Rifkin was active.
Right.
So it was natural for investigators to consider a possible connection.
Absolutely. And especially given that, Rifkin
Yeah.
often disposed of his victims' bodies
Right.
in that same general area.
Exactly.
Okay. So,
yeah.
so it made sense
Made sense.
to look into that.
Uh-huh.
But Rifkin denied any involvement
Right.
in the Gilgo Beach
Right.
murders and ultimately another man.
Yeah.
Rex Heuermann was arrested
Right.
and charged with those crimes.
So it was a red herring in that case.
Yeah,
But it speaks to the enduring fascination
it
that we
does.
have with serial killers, the way that they capture our collective imagination
Yes.
and perhaps our
On
fears.
fears, right.
They represent that dark side of humanity,
They
the
do.
potential for evil that really lurks
Mhm.
beneath the surface of
Right.
everyday life.
Yeah, and it's that unsettling reality, I think,
Yeah.
that keeps us coming back to these cases,
Right.
trying to understand the hows and the whys,
Mm-hmm.
hoping to maybe glean some insight
Right.
that might help us prevent future tragedies.
Yeah, we're drawn to the darkness even as we fear it.
We are.
We want to understand it, even if it means confronting those uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the
Yes.
society that we live in.
Absolutely.
Like we're trying to, put together this macabre puzzle,
Right.
but the pieces are scattered
Yeah.
across, the darkest corners of human experience.
Yeah, and the more pieces you find,
Yeah.
the more you realize how much you don't know.
Right.
And Joel Rifkin's case
Yeah.
is a stark reminder of that.
Uh-huh.
Here's a man who,
Yeah.
on the surface,
Right.
might have seemed relatively ordinary.
Right, yeah.
You know?
A family, a home.
Yeah, he had a life,
Uh-huh.
but yet beneath that facade,
Yeah.
there was this darkness
Right.
that eventually consumed him and led him down this path
Yeah.
of just unimaginable violence.
And that's the part that I think is so unsettling, right? It's like evil doesn't always wear a mask.
No.
It can be lurking behind these seemingly normal faces,
Right.
just blending into the crowd.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important to move beyond these simplistic explanations,
Right,
to move beyond this notion that there's a single profile
right.
that fits every serial killer.
Every case is unique.
Every case is unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned societal factors
Yeah.
a couple of times.
Sure.
What role do you think society plays
Well-
in shaping individuals like Joel Rifkin?
That's a great question
Yeah.
and one worth pondering.
Uh,
I mean, while we can't blame society for the actions of an individual,
of course, yeah.
we can examine the ways in which our systems and institutions
Yeah.
might create environments where violence can thrive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for example,
Yeah.
Rifkin's victims were primarily sex workers,
Right.
a group that's often marginalized and vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Could we have done more to protect them?
Right.
Were there societal safety nets that failed?
Yeah.
These are uncomfortable questions,
They are.
but they're ones we need to grapple with
Uh-huh.
if we truly want to prevent future tragedies.
I think you're right. We tend to focus so much on the
Right.
individual perpetrator
Yeah,
that we overlook that broader context.
right.
The societal forces that might be contributing
Got-
to these horrific acts.
And it's not about excusing the actions of the perpetrator.
Right.
It's about understanding the full picture,
The whole picture.
the complexities
Yeah.
that lead someone down a path of darkness.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and crimes of Joel Rifkin,
Yeah,
I'm left with this thought: understanding is not the same as condoning.
well said.
We can try to understand these motivations,
Yep.
without excusing or minimizing the harm
Absolutely.
that was inflicted.
I think, this case, like so many others, serves as a stark reminder
Yeah.
of the shadows that exist
Uh-huh.
within humanity.
Right.
But it also reminds us of our capacity for empathy,
Yeah.
for analysis, for action.
Yeah.
We can learn from these dark chapters,
Absolutely.
not just about the perpetrators, but about ourselves
Mhm.
and the world we live in.
Well, this has been another fascinating deep dive.
Yes, it has.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We did, yeah.
And as always, appreciate your insight.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
But for now, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode.
Sounds good.
But until next time.
Until next time.